In the mysterious village of Amaosa, nestled along the Niger River, peace turns to terror when a stranger named Ekene is discovered, washed ashore after a devastating flood, clutching a carved wooden box with glowing patterns. Ekene is shrouded in secrecy, and his arrival brings an unsettling shift. Dead fish float in the river, children vanish without a trace, and fear grips the community as whispers of the river spirit Abyssus, an ancient force demanding sacrifices, begin to spread. Adanna, the brave daughter of the village chief, is determined to uncover the truth. As she delves deeper, she learns the horrifying secret of Ekene's box. It is a prison for the souls taken by Abyssus. Bound by a cursed pact, Ekene is both victim and servant, tasked with delivering sacrifices to the malevolent spirit. When the villagers turn against him, blaming him for their misfortunes, Adanna must rally them to confront the true enemy. What follows is a heart-pounding battle at the river's edge where courage and sacrifice collide. Abyssus rises, a monstrous being of shadow and water, and the fate of the village hangs in the balance. As ancient secrets unravel, Adanna and Ekene face impossible choices, risking everything to free the lost souls and restore peace. But the river keeps its secrets well. In the end, Amaosa learns that harmony with nature is fragile, and the scars of betrayal linger longer than the waters they try to tame. Will you dare to uncover what lies beneath the surface? On a humid morning after the rainy season, the villagers of Amaosa gathered by the riverbank to inspect the aftermath of a flood that had torn through their lands the previous night. The normally serene Niger River, lifeblood of their livelihoods, had turned into a monstrous torrent, sweeping away fishing nets, canoes, and even a few goats that had been tethered too close to the banks. Yet, amidst the debris, something unusual caught their attention. A man sprawled unconscious on the muddy shore, clutching a wooden box engraved with intricate, cryptic patterns. The villagers hesitated to approach him, whispering among themselves. The man's clothes, soaked and torn, clung to his lean frame, and his face, though strikingly calm, bore the wear of countless hardships. No one in Amaosa recognized him. Strangers were a rarity, and their sudden appearance always stirred unease, especially when accompanied by omens like the recent flood. Finally, Chief Obies, a stout man with a voice that could command a restless market square, stepped forward. He gestured to a few younger men. "Bring him to the shade. If he breathes, we must help him." Reluctantly, they lifted the man and carried him to the central square beneath the ancient Iroko tree that towered over Amaosa like a silent sentinel. The box he had clung to so desperately was placed beside him, its surface gleaming as if untouched by the flood's chaos. The murmurs among the villagers grew louder. "What is in that box?" An old woman croaked, leaning on her staff. "It looks like something the spirits would carry." "Maybe it's cursed," muttered a fisherman, eyeing the stranger warily. "Or a treasure," said a curious boy, his eyes gleaming as he edged closer to the box, only to be yanked back by his mother. Hours passed before the man stirred. His eyes opened, dark and searching, as if piecing together fragments of a dream. He sat up slowly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd gathered around him. The silence was palpable. Finally, Chief Obier spoke. "Stranger, who are you? And why has the river brought you to Amaosa? The man blinked, his voice hoarse but steady as he replied, My name is Ekene. The river did not bring me here by chance. He paused, his eyes dropping to the box at his side, then added, It was destiny. His cryptic words only deepened the villagers' suspicion. Though they did not trust him, hospitality was sacred in Amaosa. The chief ordered a hut near the river to be cleared for Ekene's temporary stay. Adanna, the chief's daughter, watched the unfolding events from the periphery of the crowd. Unlike most of the villagers, she was not quick to jump to conclusions about curses or spirits. Her mother had often called her too curious for her own good, and this time was no different. While the others debated the stranger's arrival, Adanna's sharp eyes were fixed on the box. There was something about it. Its carved surface, the faint glimmer it emitted in the sunlight, that whispered secrets she longed to uncover. That evening, as the villagers resumed their routines, the stranger remained the center of hushed conversations. Women pounding yam at dusk shared theories about Ekene's origins. Was he a messenger from the gods, or a wandering soul who had angered the spirits? Adanna, however, was less concerned with theories and more intrigued by the man himself. She had observed him from a distance as he settled into his hut. He moved deliberately, as though weighed down by something heavier than exhaustion. That night, she decided to approach him, curiosity overruling caution. She found him sitting outside the hut, the box resting on his lap. The moonlight illuminated the intricate carvings, which seemed to shift and ripple like water. Ekene glanced up as she approached, but said nothing. You've caused quite a stir, Adanna began, her tone light. Amaosa isn't used to strangers. Ekene's lips twitched in what could have been the shadow of a smile. Strangers are merely those whose stories are unknown. Adanna folded her arms, tilting her head. Then tell me your story. He hesitated, his fingers tracing the edges of the box. Not all stories are meant to be told, Adanna. She stiffened, surprised that he knew her name. I listen, he interrupted, his voice calm. The village speaks, even when it thinks it whispers. Their conversation ended as abruptly as it began when Ekene stood carrying the box inside the hut. Adanna returned home, her mind buzzing with questions. Who was this man who spoke in riddles? And what was he guarding so fiercely? Days turned into a week, and while the villagers tried to return to normalcy, Ekene's presence lingered like the aftermath of a storm. Children whispered about him during play, calling him the man with the box. The elders, usually stoic, debated his significance. Some wanted him gone, fearing his presence would anger the spirits. Others argued that he was a test sent by the gods. Adanna, unable to resist her curiosity, began to visit him regularly. She learned little about him. He deflected most of her questions, but she noticed his keen interest in Amaosa's traditions and stories. When she told him about the legends of Ogbanje, spirits who brought misfortune, or Wata, the river goddess, his eyes gleamed with an unreadable emotion. And do you believe in these stories? He asked her one day. Adanna shrugged. They are part of our world. Belief is not a choice, but a way of life here. Ekene's gaze lingered on her. Sometimes belief blinds us to truths hiding in plain sight. That night, a storm rolled through Amaosa. Though no rain fell, The wind howled, carrying with it a strange, almost mournful sound. The villagers stayed indoors, clutching their charms and reciting prayers. In his hut, Ekene sat cross-legged, the box before him. The carving seemed alive, pulsating faintly in the darkness. He whispered something, a prayer perhaps, or a command. From her window, Adanna watched the flickering light from Ekene's hut. She felt an inexplicable pull, a sense that the stranger had not come to Amaosa by accident. She didn't know what role he was destined to play, but she was certain of one thing: his story was far from over. The next morning, the village awoke to an eerie sight. Near the river, hundreds of dead fish floated on the surface, their silvery scales reflecting the rising sun. The air was heavy with the stench of decay. Villagers gathered at the banks, their voices filled with fear and anger. "It is him," one man declared, pointing toward Ekene's hut. "The river has turned against us because of him." Chief Abyssus raised his hand, silencing the crowd. "We will not act without reason," he said firmly, though his eyes betrayed his own doubts. "We must uncover the truth." Ekene emerged from his hut, his face unreadable as he faced the crowd. He said nothing, only stood there, the mysterious box clutched tightly in his hands. Adanna, standing among the villagers, met his gaze. For the first time, she saw something behind his calm exterior, a flicker of guilt or perhaps regret. She knew then that whatever secrets Ekene held, they were tied to Amaosa's fate in ways no one could yet understand. The villagers dispersed uneasily, but whispers lingered like the humid air. Suspicion had taken root, and the question on everyone's mind was the same. Who was Ekene, and what did his arrival mean for Amaosa? The days that followed the mysterious fish kill were tense in Amaosa. The villagers, already uneasy about Ekene's presence, now found themselves gripped by fear. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed to have seen shadows moving along the riverbank at night, while others swore they heard whispers carried on the wind. The once vibrant village square grew quiet, with fewer children playing and adults watching the forest edge, as though it might come alive at any moment. Chief Abyssus held meetings with the village elders, their voices muffled, but their expressions grim. It was clear the leadership was divided. Some wanted Ekene expelled immediately, while others insisted on patience. They feared angering the gods by casting out a potential messenger, but they also feared what might happen if they allowed him to stay. Meanwhile, Ekene remained an enigma. He rarely left his hut, except to gather water or food. The villagers noted how he always kept the carved box close, even when tending to the simplest tasks. It was as though the box was a part of him, inseparable and heavy with secrets. Adanna watched all this unfold with a mix of curiosity and unease. She had tried speaking to Ekene again, but he had become more withdrawn, answering her questions with riddles or silence. Her instincts told her that the stranger carried a burden far greater than anyone could imagine, but no amount of charm or wit could break through the wall he had built around himself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the village in hues of orange and gold, another chilling event occurred. A boy named Kelechi, no more than 10 years old, disappeared. He had been playing near the edge of the forest with friends when he wandered off, chasing a butterfly. When his friends called out to him, there was no reply. Hours later, The search party found only his small sandal lying in the dirt near the river bank. The forest beyond was silent, save for the rustle of leaves in the wind. The villagers were terrified. To lose a child was an unspeakable tragedy, but the manner of Kelechi's disappearance felt unnatural, almost otherworldly. Whispers filled the air, and once again, fingers pointed toward Ekene. "It's him," said a woman, clutching her infant tightly. "Ever since he arrived, our village has known nothing but sorrow." "Have you seen his box?" asked another. "It glows at night, like it's alive." "We cannot keep him here," said a third. "The gods are punishing us for harboring him." That night, the village square was alive with torches and voices. The crowd was restless, their anger fueled by grief and fear. Chief Obie stood at the center, his face stern as he raised a hand for silence. "We will not act out of fear," he said, his deep voice cutting through the noise. "We will question him. If he has brought a curse upon Amaosa, he will answer for it." The villagers murmured but obeyed their chief. Together they marched toward Ekene's hut. Adanna followed reluctantly, her heart pounding. She didn't believe in rash decisions, but even she couldn't deny that something was deeply wrong in Amaosa. Ekene was waiting for them. He stood in the doorway of his hut, the box cradled in his arms like a child. His expression was calm, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of wariness. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice steady but low. Chief Obies stepped forward. "A child has disappeared," he said, "and before that, the river gave us dead fish. You came with the flood, and since then, misfortune has followed. Tell us, stranger, what curse have you brought upon our village?" Ekene's gaze swept over the crowd. For a long moment, he said nothing, letting the villagers' accusations hang in the air. Then he spoke, his tone measured but firm. "I have brought no curse. The river chose to bring me here, but its will is not my own." "Lies!" shouted someone from the crowd. "What about the box? What's inside it?" Ekene tightened his grip on the box, his knuckles white. "What's inside is not for you to know." The crowd erupted into angry shouts, demanding answers. Chief Obies raised his hand again, but this time his voice carried a sharp edge. "If you are innocent, you will prove it. Open the box." Ekene's jaw clenched. "I cannot." "Why not?" Adanna's voice cut through the tension, and the crowd turned to her. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on Ekene. "If you mean no harm, then show us. Prove you are not the cause of this." Ekene looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Adanna thought he might relent. But then he shook his head, taking a step back. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "Opening this box would bring a far greater darkness than anything you have seen." The villagers didn't believe him. Their fear had turned to rage, and several men stepped forward, intent on seizing the box by force. But before they could reach him, Ekene raised a hand. "Stop!" His voice was louder than they had ever heard, carrying a weight that seemed to freeze them in their tracks. "You think I am your enemy, but I am the only thing standing between you and what lies beyond." The crowd hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Chief Obies frowned, but he signaled for the men to stand down. "You speak in riddles, Ekene. If you will not explain yourself, Then how can we trust you? Ekene didn't answer. Instead, he turned and retreated into his hut, closing the door behind him. The villagers stood in stunned silence, their torches flickering in the night. One by one, they began to disperse, though their anger simmered just below the surface. Adanna lingered, her eyes fixed on the closed door. She felt torn between loyalty to her village and the nagging sense that Ekene was telling the truth, or at least a version of it. Whatever was happening in Amaosa, she was certain the box held the key. The following days were no less troubling. Another child reported seeing shadows near the forest at dusk, moving too quickly to be human. A fisherman swore he heard singing from the river, though no one was there when he searched. At night, the air grew colder, and the village animals became restless, their cries echoing in the dark. Adanna, unable to shake her curiosity, decided to take matters into her own hands. Late one evening, while the village slept, she made her way to Ekene's hut. She wasn't sure what she intended to do. Confront him, reason with him, or perhaps steal a glimpse inside the box. But as she approached, she saw a faint light emanating from the hut, pulsing like the heartbeat of something alive. Her footsteps faltered. She felt an inexplicable dread, as though crossing an invisible threshold. Summoning her courage, she stepped closer and peered through the small window. What she saw froze her in place. Ekene knelt on the floor, the box open before him. The light from inside was blinding, swirling with colors that defied description. His lips moved silently, as though in prayer, but his expression was one of anguish. For a brief moment, Adanna thought she saw faces in the light, faint and fleeting, but unmistakably human. She stumbled back, her heart racing. Whatever the box contained, it was no ordinary object. She turned and fled, her mind spinning with questions and the growing certainty that Amaosa's troubles were far from over. Adanna spent the entire night tossing and turning. The image of the swirling light inside Ekene's box seared into her mind. She couldn't forget the faint, shadowy faces that seemed to emerge from its glow, nor the expression of anguish on Ekene's face as he knelt before it. What could the box possibly hold? And why was it causing so much turmoil in Amaosa? The questions haunted her like restless spirits. By dawn, Adanna had made up her mind. She couldn't sit idly by while her village descended further into fear and suspicion. She had to confront Ekene and demand the truth. Her heart pounded as she made her way to his hut, the early morning mist clinging to her skin. When she arrived, she found the door slightly ajar. "Ekene," she called, hesitating at the threshold. Inside, Ekene sat, cross-legged on the floor, the box placed before him. He didn't look up, but his voice cut through the stillness. "I knew you would come back." Adanna stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The room was sparse, with only a small mat, a clay pot for water, and the ever-present box at its center. "You owe me answers," she said, her tone firm. "What is in that box? What did I see last night?" Ekene finally lifted his gaze to meet hers. His dark eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but there was a flicker of something else. Resignation, perhaps. "You saw the truth," he said quietly, "or at least a part of it." "Then explain it to me," Adanna insisted. "My village is falling apart. Children are disappearing. The river is dying, Everyone believes it's because of you. And that box, Ekene sighed, his shoulders slumping. They are not entirely wrong, he admitted, but they do not understand what they are dealing with. Then help me understand, Adanna urged. What is this box? Why is it here? For a long moment, Ekene said nothing. Then, as though making a difficult decision, he placed his hands on the box and began to speak. This box is a prison, he said, his voice low and steady. It contains the souls of those taken by Abyssus, the spirit of the river. Abyssus is not just a legend, it is real, a force as ancient as the river itself. It demands offerings, sacrifices to sustain its power. When the sacrifices to sustain its power, when the sacrifices stop, it. Adanna felt a chill run down her spine. The missing children. Ekene nodded grimly. Their souls are trapped inside this box, along with others taken over the years. Abyssus uses me as its collector. It brought me here because it sensed the village's fear. Fear makes it stronger. Adanna struggled to process his words. But why you? Why would you agree to something so horrible? Ekene's expression darkened. I didn't agree. I was forced. Years ago, I was a fisherman, like many in this village. One day, a storm swept me into the river. I should have died, but Abyssus saved me. At a price, it bound me to this box, making me its servant. I must collect souls. Adanna's mind reeled. And you just accept this. You've let it continue. Do you think I haven't tried to escape? Ekene's voice rose, his frustration boiling over. I fought against it every day of my life, but the box is tied to me. As long as it exists, I cannot break free. Adanna took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. Then, why did you bring it here? Why not leave and take it far away from Amaosa? Ekene shook his head. It's not that simple. Abyssus is everywhere the river flows. Running wouldn't change anything, and now it's too late. The box has already claimed too much. Destroying it would unleash a darkness this village cannot handle. Adanna's heart sank. The weight of Ekene's story was overwhelming, but it also filled her with a sense of urgency. There has to be another way, she said softly, a way to save those souls and end this. Ekene looked at her, a glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. There is one way, he said reluctantly, but it is dangerous. The elders of your village may have the knowledge to summon the spirits of the river. If we can call Abyssus and confront it directly, we might negotiate for the release of the souls. Adanna frowned. Negotiate. With a spirit that takes children? It's not as simple as good and evil, Ekene explained. Abyssus is a force of nature. It doesn't think like we do. It has rules, boundaries. If we find the right ritual, we might have a chance. Though her instincts told her to proceed with caution, Adanna couldn't ignore the possibility of saving the missing villagers. She stood, her resolve hardening. I'll speak to the elders, but you must be honest with them. And the village, they need to know the truth. Ekene hesitated, then nodded. I will do what I can, but I can't promise they will listen. As Adanna left the hut, her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. The village elders had always been the guardians of Amaosa's traditions, but their fear of spirits often outweighed their wisdom. Convincing them to summon Abyssus would be no small task, especially with suspicion toward Ekene already running high. When she arrived at the elders' meeting hall, she found them seated in a circle, their faces lined with worry. Chief Obies was at the center, his expression grim. Adanna wasted no time. She recounted everything Ekene had told her, sparing no detail. The elders listened in stunned silence, their eyes widening as she spoke of Abyssus, the box, and the souls trapped within it. When she finished, the room erupted in heated debate. "This is madness," one elder exclaimed. "You want us to summon a spirit that has already taken so much from us?" "But what choice do we have?" Adanna countered. "If we do nothing, more will be taken. The box cannot stay here." "And what if it's a trick?" another elder argued. "How do we know this stranger isn't lying to us?" Chief Obies raised a hand, silencing the room. Adanna hesitated, then nodded. "I do. He doesn't want to hurt us. He's as much a victim as we are." The chief's expression softened, but his tone remained cautious. Summoning Abyssus is not a decision to be made lightly. If we fail, it could bring destruction to Amaosa. "Doing nothing will bring the same result," Adanna said firmly. "At least this way we have a chance to fight back." The room fell silent as the elders weighed her words. Finally, Chief Obiese spoke. "We will consult the sacred texts and prepare the ritual. But know this, Adanna, if this fails, the blame will fall on you and Ekene." Adanna nodded, accepting the weight of his words. She left the hall feeling both hopeful and anxious. The plan was in motion, but success was far from guaranteed. As she walked back through the village, she noticed the wary stares of the villagers, their distrust as palpable as the humid air. When she returned to Ekene's hut to deliver the news, she found him standing outside, the box in his hands. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes betrayed his apprehension. "They agreed," Adanna said. "We'll summon Abyssus, but you'll need to be ready to face whatever comes." Ekene nodded slowly. "I've been ready for years." As the sun set over Amaosa, casting long shadows across the village, a sense of foreboding settled over the land. The ritual would begin at dawn, and with it, the fate of Amaosa would be decided. Adanna and Ekene both knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger, but there was no turning back now. The secrets of the box were no longer hidden, and the time for action had come. As dawn broke over Amaosa, the village was cloaked in a tense silence. The morning mist hung thick, blurring the edges of the huts and the towering Iroko tree at the village center. The villagers had been roused by whispers of a planned ritual to summon Abyssus, the feared spirit of the river. It was a bold and dangerous decision, one that divided the community even further. Chief Obies stood at the center of the square, addressing the gathered crowd. His voice was firm but tinged with unease. "Today, we will face the truth. The ritual will summon Abyssus, and we will demand the release of the souls it has taken. But know this, such a spirit does not yield easily. We must prepare ourselves for what may come." The villagers murmured among themselves, their fear palpable. Some clutched charms for protection, while others glanced nervously toward Ekene, who stood off to the side with Adanna. The stranger's presence seemed to draw a tangible weight in the air, as though his very existence disturbed the natural order. Ekene remained silent, the box cradled in his arms. His expression was unreadable, but his grip on the box was tight, as if it were the only anchor keeping him steady. Adanna stood close by, her eyes darting between her father and the villagers. She knew this moment was critical. If the ritual failed, or worse, if it brought disaster, Ekene would bear the brunt of the blame. As the elders prepared the ceremonial space near the river, a group of villagers began to gather in opposition. They were led by Amobi, a hot-tempered fisherman who had lost his son, Kelechi, to the river's mysterious curse. "This is madness!" Amobi shouted, his voice carrying over the murmur of the crowd. "We are risking everything for a stranger who brought this curse upon us. Look at him. He clutches that cursed box like a child to its mother. He is no victim. He is the cause." Several villagers voiced their agreement, their faces twisted with anger and grief. "We should destroy the box." One woman cried, "Let it burn and take its evil with it." Chief Obiese raised a hand for silence, but the unrest was growing. The villagers' fear had turned to fury, and their suspicion of Ekene was now a boiling rage. Amobi stepped forward, pointing an accusatory finger at Ekene. "If you are innocent, then prove it. Open the box and show us what's inside. If you refuse, it's because you are hiding something." Ekene's eyes narrowed, and his voice was cold as he replied, "You don't understand what you're asking. Opening this box will not save you. It will doom you." Amobi sneered, "More riddles and lies. You have no power here, stranger. If you will not act, we will." He turned to the crowd, rallying them. "Take the box from him. End this nightmare before it consumes us all." The villagers surged forward, their anger spilling over into action. Adanna stepped in front of Ekene, her arms outstretched. "Stop!" she shouted. "You're letting fear control you. This box isn't the solution or the problem. It's a tool we must use to confront Abyssus. Destroying it will only make things worse." But her words fell on deaf ears. The crowd pressed closer, their shouts growing louder. Ekene backed away, clutching the box tightly, but it was clear he wouldn't be able to hold them off for long. Adanna glanced at him, her mind racing. "Run," she whispered urgently. Ekene hesitated, his jaw clenched. "I won't leave you to face them alone." "You have to," she insisted. "If they get the box, everything will be lost. Go!" Before he could argue further, Adanna stepped toward the mob, drawing their attention. "If you want the box, you'll have to get through me first." Her bold declaration gave Ekene the moment he needed. He turned and sprinted toward the forest, disappearing into the dense trees. The villagers hesitated, unsure whether to chase him or confront Adanna. Amobi, however, was relentless. "After him!" he roared. "Don't let him escape!" A group of men broke away from the crowd and plunged into the forest, their torches lighting the dim undergrowth. Adanna watched them go, her heart pounding. She could only hope Ekene would evade them long enough to reach safety. In the forest, Ekene moved swiftly, his bare feet finding purchase on the damp earth. The box in his arms seemed heavier with each step, its carved surface pulsating faintly. He could hear the shouts of his pursuers growing closer, the flicker of their torches cutting through the shadows. He stumbled into a small clearing and paused, catching his breath. The forest was alive with the sounds of insects and rustling leaves, but there was something else, a faint hum, almost imperceptible, emanating from the box. It was a warning, he realized. Abyssus was stirring. Before he could move again, a figure emerged from the trees. It was Amobi, his face twisted with rage, a machete glinting in his hand. Behind him, the other men spread out, forming a loose circle around Ekene. You thought you could run? Amobi sneered, stepping closer. Give me the box, or I'll take it from your cold, lifeless hands. Ekene tightened his grip, his eyes darting between the men. You don't know what you're doing, he said. If you open this box, you'll unleash a power you cannot control. Amobi laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the clearing. More lies. Enough of this nonsense. He lunged forward, his machete raised. Ekene reacted instinctively, twisting to avoid the blow. The box slipped from his grasp and tumbled to the ground, landing with a hollow thud. The hum grew louder, a low vibration that seemed to ripple through the air. The men froze, their eyes fixed on the box as its carvings began to glow faintly. What's happening? One of them whispered, fear creeping into his voice. Ekene seized the moment of distraction. He lunged for the box, scooping it up and clutching it to his chest. You can't stop this, he said, his voice trembling with urgency. The ritual must go on. If we fail, Abyssus will destroy everything. Amobi hesitated, his bravado faltering in the face of the box's strange power. But before he could act, a deafening roar erupted from the direction of the river. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a cold wind swept through the forest, carrying the faint scent of brine. The men exchanged panicked glances. The spirit, one of them muttered. Ekene turned to them, his expression grim. If you want to save your village, you'll let me go. There's still time to stop this, but only if you trust me. For a moment, no one moved. Then, reluctantly, Amobi lowered his machete. The other men followed suit, stepping back to let Ekene pass. He didn't wait for them to change their minds. Clutching the box, he disappeared into the forest, heading toward the river where the elders were preparing the ritual. The men stood in silence, the weight of what they had just witnessed sinking in. Amobi's shoulders slumped as he turned back toward the village, his anger replaced by a gnawing fear. Whatever was coming, it was beyond their understanding and their control. The riverside was shrouded in an eerie stillness, broken only by the rhythmic rustling of leaves and the faint ominous hum of the water. The elders of Amaosa had prepared the ceremonial ground with trembling hands, chanting prayers to the gods for protection. A circle of torches cast flickering light on the makeshift altar where sacred symbols had been etched into the earth. At the altar's center lay offerings, carved figurines, palm oil, and cola nuts. Carved figurines, palm oil, and cola nuts, gifts meant to appease Abyssus. Adanna stood beside Chief Obiese, her heart pounding as she watched the preparations. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had convinced the elders to attempt this ritual, but if it failed, Amaosa could face consequences far worse than the disappearance of its children. Suddenly, a rustle in the trees caught everyone's attention. The torches flickered violently as Ekene emerged from the forest, clutching the box tightly against his chest. His face was pale, his eyes darting around as though he could feel unseen eyes watching him. Behind him, the group of men who had pursued him earlier trailed hesitantly, their expressions a mix of fear and confusion. "You're late," Chief Obier said, his voice steady but stern. "I was delayed," Ekene replied breathlessly, stepping into the circle. He looked at the altar, then at the elders. "Is everything ready?" "As ready as it will ever be," one of the elders muttered, casting a wary glance at the glowing carvings on the box. Adanna moved to stand beside Ekene, her voice low but urgent. "Are you sure about this?" "No," Ekene admitted, his grip on the box tightening. With a deep breath, Ekene placed the box at the center of the altar. The hum grew louder, resonating through the air like the distant toll of a bell. The villagers gathered at the edge of the clearing, their fearful whispers blending with the sound of the river. Some clutched charms, others held their children close, unwilling to let them stray even a few steps away. The chief raised his hands, signaling the start of the ritual. The elders began to chant, their voices quivering but resolute. The language was ancient, unfamiliar even to many in the village, but its cadence carried a strange, otherworldly power. The air grew colder, and the water of the Niger began to ripple unnaturally, as though something massive was stirring beneath the surface. Then came the first roar, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers through everyone present. The river churned violently, its dark waters rising in unnatural waves. A second roar followed, louder this time, echoing across the clearing like the cry of a predator announcing its presence. And then it emerged. Abyssus rose from the river, a towering figure of shadow and water. Its form was amorphous, constantly shifting between the shape of a man, a serpent, and a monstrous wave. Its eyes glowed like twin lanterns in the darkness, fixed on the altar where the box lay. The villagers gasped, some falling to their knees in terror. Chief Obies took a step forward, his voice trembling as he addressed the spirit. "Abyssus, great guardian of the river, we summon you to seek justice and peace. Release the souls you have taken, and we will offer what is rightfully yours." The spirit's voice rumbled like thunder, shaking the very earth beneath their feet. "You dare summon me, mortals? You who have failed to honor the river, who have let fear taint your offerings? You are unworthy." Adanna's heart raced as she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the fear. "We do not seek to defy you, Abyssus. We only wish to protect our people. The souls you have taken are innocent. They do not belong to you." Abyssus turned its glowing eyes toward her, its shifting form coiling like a serpent preparing to strike. "You speak of innocence, yet your people have polluted my waters with greed and neglect. These souls are my payment for what has been taken." Before Adanna could respond, Ekene stepped forward, his voice loud and clear. "This is not about the villagers' failings. This is about me. I am your servant, and I have brought you what you asked for. But no more." The spirit's gaze narrowed, and the waters around its form began to swirl violently. "You forget your place, servant. You are bound to me by your own folly." "No," Ekene said firmly, lifting the box. "I was bound by fear, but I will no longer serve. Today, this ends." With that, Ekene opened the box. A blinding light burst forth, illuminating the clearing in an otherworldly glow. Faces swirled within the light, ghostly, anguished, but unmistakably human. The villagers gasped as they recognized their lost loved ones. Kelechi, the boy who had disappeared, the fisherman who had never returned, and even souls from generations past, their forms flickering like fading memories. Abyssus roared in fury, its form lashing out toward the box, but the light seemed to repel it, forcing the spirit to recoil. The ground trembled as the spirit's wrath intensified, the river rising higher and threatening to spill over its banks. Adanna turned to Ekene, shouting over the chaos. What do we do now? We have to destroy it. Ekene shouted back, his face contorted with effort as he held the box steady. It's the only way to break its hold. But the souls, Adanna began. They'll be free, Ekene interrupted. Trust me. Adanna hesitated only a moment before grabbing a ceremonial staff from the altar. She raised it high, bringing it down on the box with all her strength. The carved wood splintered and the light exploded outward, blinding everyone in the clearing. When the light faded, the box was gone. The souls, no longer bound, ascended into the night sky like glowing fireflies, their cries of anguish replaced by a serene, haunting melody. The villagers watched in awe, tears streaming down their faces as they saw their loved ones finally at peace. Abyssus let out a final, deafening roar, its form unraveling like mist in the wind. The river calmed, its waters retreating to their natural flow. The clearing fell silent, save for the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Ekene collapsed to his knees, his energy spent. Adanna rushed to his side, gripping his shoulder. It's over, she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. He looked up at her, a faint smile playing on his lips. For you, maybe, but for me. He trailed off, his gaze drifting toward the river. Without another word, he stood and began to walk toward the water. Ekene, wait! Adanna called, but he didn't stop. He turned once, his expression peaceful. The river still calls me, he said softly, but now I walk it on my own terms. Before she could reply, he stepped into the water, his form disappearing beneath the surface. The villagers stood in stunned silence, watching as the river carried him away. Adanna felt a pang of sorrow, but also a sense of closure. Ekene's journey had ended, but Amaosa's had just begun. As the villagers began to gather themselves, Chief Obis placed a hand on Adanna's shoulder. You were brave, he said quietly. You saved us all. Adanna nodded, her gaze fixed on the river. She didn't feel like a savior. She felt like someone who had seen the weight of the world and chosen to bear it, if only for a moment. The morning after the battle with Abyssus, Amaosa awoke to a world that felt different, as though the air itself had been cleansed. The river, once restless and foreboding, now flowed gently, its waters shimmering under the first rays of sunlight. Birds returned to the treetops, their songs weaving a fragile melody of renewal. Yet, for all its beauty, the village bore the marks of the turmoil it had endured. Adanna stood by the riverbank, gazing out over the water. Her thoughts lingered on Ekene, the man who had carried the weight of an unimaginable curse and sacrificed everything to free Amaosa from its grip. The memory of his final words haunted her. The river still calls me, but now I walk it on my own terms. She wondered if he had found peace or if the river would claim him forever. Behind her, the villagers gathered in small, hushed groups. Many carried offerings, calabashes of water, fresh fish, and woven charms, to place by the river as thanks for the peace restored to their home. The elders, normally stoic, were visibly shaken, their eyes betraying the weight of what they had witnessed. Chief Obies approached Adanna, his steps heavy but deliberate. He stopped beside her, following her gaze out over the water. "You did what no one else could," he said quietly. "You stood firm when even I faltered. For that, Amaosa owes you its gratitude." Adanna turned to him, her expression conflicted. "We may have won, but the cost was high. Kelechi and the others may be at peace now, but nothing can erase the pain their families endured." The chief nodded solemnly. "True, but their freedom is a gift that will endure for generations. And it is a reminder of the price we pay when we stray too far from balance." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The village had learned a harsh lesson. Their neglect of tradition and reverence for the river had created a rift, one that Abyssus had exploited. Now, they faced the daunting task of rebuilding, not just their homes, but their connection to the land and water that sustained them. Later that day, the villagers gathered under the shade of the ancient Irako tree, where the elders held a meeting to determine the way forward. The crowd was larger than usual, with even the youngest children sitting quietly, sensing the gravity of the moment. Elder Olama, the oldest and most respected among them, rose to speak. Her voice, though frail, carried the weight of generations. "Amaosa has faced a trial unlike any other," she began, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "We have seen the power of Abyssus and the consequences of our negligence. But we have also seen the strength of unity, courage, and sacrifice." She paused, letting her words sink in. "From this day forward, we must renew our bond with the river and the spirits that dwell within it. Let us remember that the river is not our enemy, but as remember that the river is not our enemy, but a guardian, a force that demands respect and balance." The villagers nodded, their faces solemn. Plans were made to hold regular ceremonies of gratitude and to ensure the river remained clean and unpolluted. Fishermen vowed to take only what was needed, and the women pledged to teach the younger generation about the sacred traditions that had once guided their lives. As the meeting ended, Adanna felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of something new, a chance for Amaosa to heal not just from the scars of Abyssus, but from the divisions and fears that had taken root within the community. Over the following weeks, life in Amaosa slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The laughter of children once again filled the village square, and the market bustled with activity as fishermen brought in fresh catches. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a quiet reverence, a collective understanding of the fragility of their peace. Adanna found herself drawn to the river more often than before. She would sit by its edge, her feet dangling in the cool water, and think of Ekene. She wondered if his spirit lingered in the currents, watching over the village he had helped save. Sometimes she swore she could hear faint whispers in the water, a gentle reassurance that he was at peace. One day, as she sat there, Elder Olama approached and settled beside her. "You think of him often," the elder said, her voice kind. Adanna nodded. "He gave everything to protect us. I just I wish I could have done more for him." Olama placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. Ekene's story is one of redemption. He may have been bound by Abyssus, but in the end he chose his own path. That choice, Adanna, is what freed him, and it was you who gave him the courage to make it. Adanna didn't respond immediately, but the elder's words brought her a measure of comfort. She looked out over the river, the sunlight dancing on its surface, and felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in weeks. As the seasons changed, the story of Ekene and the battle with Abyssus became a cherished part of Amaosa's oral history. Around the evening fires, elders recounted the tale to wide-eyed children, emphasizing the importance of courage, unity, and respect for the forces beyond human understanding. Adanna, too, became a central figure in these stories, though she often downplayed her role. To her, the true heroes were the souls who had endured Abyssus's grasp and Ekene, whose sacrifice had given them a second chance, Years later, when Adanna took her father's place as the leader of Amaosa, she carried the lessons of that fateful battle with her. Under her guidance, the village thrived, not through exploitation of the river, but through harmony with it. New rituals were created, blending ancient traditions with practices that reflected the needs of a changing world. The villagers began to see the river not just as a resource, but as a living, breathing entity, a partner in their survival. And yet, the memory of Abyssus lingered. The villagers never forgot the shadow that had once loomed over their home. They built a small shrine near the river, not to worship the spirit, but to honor the balance it demanded. At its base, they inscribed a simple message: respect the river, and it will respect you. On the anniversary of the battle, Adanna stood before the shrine with the villagers gathered behind her. She held a calabash of water and poured it onto the earth, a symbol of gratitude and renewal. As she did, a cool breeze swept through the crowd, carrying with it the faintest whisper, a sound so subtle that only she seemed to notice. She smiled, her gaze drifting toward the horizon where the river met the sky. Though Ekene was gone, his legacy lived on, woven into the fabric of Amaosa's rebirth. The village had faced the storm and emerged stronger, wiser and more united than ever before. As the sun set over the river, casting its golden light over the village, Adanna felt a deep sense of peace. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined Amaosa. Instead, they served as a reminder, a testament to the resilience of a people who had faced the shadows and found their way back to the light. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this tale. Your presence here means everything, and we hope the story of Amaosa has left you inspired, reflective, or even a little awestruck. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. By joining us, you'll never miss another captivating story that transports you to new worlds and unforgettable adventures. Until next time, thank you for watching.